mean, they're not always even in any way. There are certain things that he thinks are worth doing in these so-called memorandum sketches, and some things that we today might think of as necessary for the reality quotient that he doesn't even bother with.
I'm a physician, so I've always been very naturally interested in the photographs taken by the ward, by the medical department, the soldiers. And I was always wondering about, is there any documentation about how the soldiers felt? I mean, were they just being ordered to do it? Were they proud of those wounds? I mean, some of them, you know, they're still even today very, very shocking photographs. And also, do we know, did their families see these photographs? And these were people who were identified. I mean, they wore names, and so that it wasn't like the war dead on the battlefield who were anonymous.
I don't know the answer to that.
Most of those are post-war, right? Those
Yeah.
photographs?
Yes.
Post-war.
I can't remember the name of, there's a book of images that are identified. And some of the families were familiar with the experience that their sons had with surgery, and just like the scourge back was known as scourge back for a long time, that, you know, was identified by Gordon, the name Gordon, and also where he was where he lived in Louisiana. But some of them are identified, and I'm going to tell you the name of the book in a second. I can see it, but I can't read it. But it's a really important project. Yeah, that a number of people who are in the medical profession focused on identifying the names, the location, the wound, the type of wound, everything.
May I ask you a question back, though, with your expertise, though? Having seen a photograph like that, would it be instructive for a medical?
Yes, I mean, that was, I think at the time, those were really probably the first medical photographs that had ever been taken. But I think people looking at how wounds and trying to understand what would be the best amputation, as that was obviously major surgery. But even internal wounds, I mean, we've seen people about draining wounds, leaving wounds open, so a lot of controversy at that time. So I think that they certainly were quite instructive. I mean, that was my understanding, was that was the purpose of taking them, to try to instruct physicians what was probably best practice, to understand what were the best practices.
Stanley Burns, do you know?
Yes,
His
yes.
collection also has a strong collection of images.
If I may, I'd just point out that one of the interesting things about those photographs is while the wounds are bare, they are studio pictures. Frequently the rest of the body is clothed in very nice clothing, in a uniform or in a suit. They're often sitting next to a table with a tablecloth on it or a vase of flowers. And so all of the conventions of regular portraiture are often, I mean not always, but in many of these pictures, all of the conventions of regular portraiture are there, which can only signal to me that they're trying to preserve the dignity of the sitter, while also encouraging the sitter to understand the purpose of the photograph as having that medical information. But they're not clinical, you know. And it's sort of like looking at Thomas Aiken's surgery pictures and how they changed. Clinical didn't exist as a style yet, but they definitely have all of the trappings of a sort of middle class sense of self. There's nothing anonymous about the people posing those, at least the ones that I've looked closely at.
We'll take one more question.
My name is Glenn Spear. I went to school here in history, and I'm also an old photo editor from the Associated Press, one of the first jobs I had. And this has been fascinating. I really enjoyed it. And I was particularly interested in what you were talking about, Professor Mitchell, with the photos of the very light-skinned black children, freed slaves. And what that made me wonder about was exactly how are these photos perceived? What does it say about attitudes in the North, particularly Massachusetts, say, about miscegenation, perceptions of black people, you know, in terms of, you know, we're always asking, well, who's black, who's white, etc. And that's what I'm curious about.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that what's interesting about that series taken during the Civil War is that it had to have had this sort of two-sided effect in the sense that it sort of raised the sympathies of people, but it also, I think, raised the anxieties of people as well in the North. And there's actually one
Anxiety?
racial anxieties about racial mixture, which
Yes.
were, you know, sort of have been building for a long time, but the notion that once everyone is free, and there are people that look white but are not, the possibility of them mixing in white society, is someone going to question your whiteness because you look white? But, I mean, so there are actually two photographs in that series. One is of 3 of the children, and there's a little story underneath it that says these children were expelled from a hotel, I think in Philadelphia, when it was learned that they had been slaves. And I think that sort of story was about telling people both, you know, that's terrible that these children were thrown out, but at the same time, like, who else could get thrown out of a hotel for being, you know, if you're attached to slavery is attached to your personal story. And then there's one other one that they had made wherein 3 of those children are posed wrapped in American flags. And I think that one is also sort of trying to sort of, in some ways, quell that racial anxiety, just to say that you know, these are white-looking children, but they are sort of, this is, you know, that they're emancipated and they're going to become Americans, and it's okay, you know. But I think that these pictures can be read both ways. That it's about ending slavery, and it's also about emancipation, and how do we know how people read those two stories. It's not entirely clear, but the suggestions are that they were read in terms of emancipation as well as in terms of
But
slavery.
it's kind of sad, I thought, in terms of the propaganda that you talked about, which is interesting to me, that in order for Sumner and the abolitionists in the North to get more sympathy, you know, for abolitionism and for slaves, they're using these very light, you know,
Right.
black children that are passing for white to try to instigate anti-slavery feeling.
Right.
You know, I thought that said quite a bit about things as well.
Right, and so far have not found any sort of commentary to that effect from the 19th century to say, you know, why are we just having sympathy for these children? I haven't found it.
There's actually a print of Sumner walking in the street with a poor white girl coming up to him, and there's a little black
that's
girl.
right, that's right,
And
yeah,
the poor
that's right.
white girl saying, why am I not, you know, being treated the way this black girl is, or words to that effect.
Right, so it's sort of reversed.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
thing is reversed, but in terms of the sympathy for whites through these photographs, I haven't seen any. But yeah,
Thank you. One more.
My name is Aston Gonzalez. I'm a PhD candidate at the University of Michigan. And my question is really simple, I think, and well, it's lame. But where are the black photographers? And I'm asking because I think you've all touched on how the photographers of these images really wield a lot of control and power over subjects, and many other things. But I'm wondering about the artistic production of African Americans in particular, because I know in the 1830s and 40s, they're very involved in creating lithographs, painting, or creating oil paintings, and also, you know, creating daguerreotypes of black and white abolitionists or famous people in Philadelphia and New York in particular. So I'm also thinking about, like, you know, Henry Box Brown and creating panoramas, J.P. Ball's panorama in 1855. I mean, African Americans are very, very involved in having a voice, having a say in what ideas are communicated about race at this time. So I was wondering, where are the black photographers, or are there any that we know of?
They, just in terms of the one that I showed was Augustus Washington, and his work, he had a studio and worked as a photographer as well as an abolitionist. But on the front, there were operators who worked for Brady and not known as photographers, so they were working on the battlefield. But I can't 3 black photographers going south, moving south to document this. I have not been able to find any, but I have found notices, information about blacks working as operators or working in developing the film and working in that as laborers for photographers. But the 2 well-known photographers working during the time were working as abolitionists, documenting other abolitionists.